The woman came up to me at the reception, after almost everyone had gone, when the church ladies were already wrapping foil over the pans. I had never seen her before in my life. She was maybe 35, in a black dress that did not fit her, and had clearly been bought that morning, and she had been standing at the back of the fellowship hall for 2 hours without eating anything. She took my hand in both of hers. Her hands were freezing, and she said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I was there that night. I saw everything. I want to tell you what I did, because I have gone over it 100 times since, and I am not proud of all of it." I did not scream. I did not swing at her, though my son says my whole body changed and he started across the room. What I did was look down at our hands, this stranger's cold hands wrapped around mine, and say, in a completely normal voice, the voice you use at a funeral, "You'll have to be more specific, honey. There's a lot of nights." And she said, "March 19th, 2009. The Gas and Go on Carolina Beach Road. That is the night my husband did not kill Ashley Boone. That is the night the state of North Carolina says he did. That is the night that took 12 years and 4 months off his life, and took his father's funeral, and took the birth of his son, and took, in the end, all of him, because he came home in 2022 and was dead 14 months later at 39 years old." And here was a woman in a brand new black dress, at his repast, with a paper plate she hadn't touched, telling me she had been there. Welcome back to Still Standing Stories, where the women who lost everything to somebody else's silence finally hear the whole truth. Before we go any further, subscribe, because what that woman told me over the next 2 hours in the church parking lot is not what you think it is, and neither is what my husband did about it 4 years before he died. I did not find that part out until 3 days later, in a notebook, and it is the reason I'm telling this story at all. My name is Dana Whitfield. I am 41 years old and I work in the cafeteria at an elementary school in Wilmington, North Carolina. I have worked there 11 years. I make about $30,000 and I know the name of every child who comes through that line. And that job is the only reason my son and I did not end up in my aunt's spare room in 2014. I met Ray Whitfield when I was 19, and he was 21, at a tire shop where he was working the counter, and he talked me into an alignment I did not need. That is the honest origin of a 19-year marriage. He was funny, he was terrible at his job in a way that was funny, and he had a laugh you could hear from the parking lot. He was a big man, 6'3" and built like his daddy, and I want to say that early because it matters to everything that happened. A jury looks at a big black man from the wrong end of Wilmington and they have already written half the story before anybody says a word. Ray knew that about himself from the time he was 15. He was the gentlest person I have ever known, and he moved through the world like a man apologizing for taking up space, and it did not save him. We got married when I was 22. We rented a place on Nixon Street with a bad water heater. He was working 2 jobs, the tire shop and part-time nights unloading trucks at a grocery distributor, because we were saving for a house and because I was pregnant. I was 6 weeks pregnant when they arrested him. Here's what happened on March 19, 2009, according to the state of North Carolina. At 11:40 p.m., a man walked into the Gas and Go on Carolina Beach Road, went behind the counter, and shot a 22-year-old clerk named Ashley Boone 1 time in the chest during a robbery that netted $216. She died on the floor behind the register before the ambulance got there. I need to say her name properly and more than once because in 12 years of fighting for my husband, I watched what happens to a murdered girl in a case like this. She becomes a fact in an argument. Ashley Boone was 22. She was taking classes at Cape Fear Community College. She had a mother named Vicky and a little brother. She was working a night shift because night shifts pay more. She has been dead for 17 years and nobody has ever been convicted of killing her. And I want you to hold that with me for this entire story because I have held it every day. Here's what actually happened to Ray that night. He got off his shift at the distributor at 11:15. He drove home. He stopped for gas, not at the Gas and Go, at a Hess station about 4 miles away, and he got home a little before midnight and got in bed, and I woke up enough to know he was there. That is it. That is the entire thing. 11 days later they arrested him in our driveway. Stay with me, because how they built that case is the part that people who have never been near this system do not understand, and it is the reason I can now tell you exactly, mechanically, how an innocent man goes to prison. There were 3 pieces. The first was a witness, a man who had been outside the store and told police he saw a tall black male, heavyset, leave the store fast and get into a dark sedan. That is it. That was the description. In a county with a black population of about 80,000 people. The second was that Ray owned a dark blue Buick. The third, and this is the one that convicted him, was a jailhouse informant named Curtis Ledford, who was sitting on a possession charge and who came forward 6 weeks after the arrest to say that Ray had confessed to him in the holding area at New Hanover County. Ray had been in that holding area for about 90 minutes total. Curtis Ledford got his charge dropped. He testified for 2 hours. He is dead now. He died in 2019 in another facility, and I did not feel anything about it that I'm willing to say out loud. The public defender who represented my husband had 140 open cases. I want to be fair to that man because he was not lazy, and he was not stupid. He was one attorney with 140 people's lives in a filing cabinet. He met with Ray 4 times before trial. 4 times, over 14 months, for a first-degree murder charge. He did not hire an investigator. There was no money for an investigator. He never went to the gas and go. The trial took 6 days. The jury was out for 4 hours and 11 minutes. And I remember the 11 because I counted, and I want to tell you what I thought when they came back that fast. I thought, thank God. 4 hours means they saw it. 4 hours means there's nothing there and they know it. 4 hours means they had already decided and were being polite about it. Life without parole. He was 25 years old. I was 24 and 5 months pregnant, and I made a sound in that courtroom that my mother-in-law told me later she had never heard a person make. I want to tell you about the trial, because 6 days is not very long and I sat through every hour of it and I have never been able to stop replaying it. The prosecutor was a man named Gerald Pace, who is a judge now. He was good. I want to say that plainly. He was very good at his job, and his job was to build a story that 12 people could carry back into a room with them. And the story he built was simple, and it was airtight if you did not look at it. The story was a working man with a pregnant wife and money trouble. A dark sedan, a big man in a small store. The money trouble is the part that finished us. We were saving for a house. We had $1,100 in a savings account at the credit union. And Ray had picked up the second job because we were short every month, and Gerald Pace put our bank statements up on a screen and walked that jury through them line by line. Overdraft in January, overdraft in February, he said the word desperate 9 times. I counted because counting is what I did in that room to keep from screaming. They took my marriage and made it a motive. 2 people in their 20s trying to buy a house became, in the mouth of a very good lawyer, a man who needed $216 badly enough to shoot a girl for it. The eyewitness testified on day 2. His name was Marvin Teague, and he was 51, and he had been outside the store at his truck. On direct, he was certain. Tall black male, heavy-set, moving fast, dark sedan. On cross, our attorney got him to say that it was dark, that it was raining lightly, that he was maybe 40 yards off, and that he had told the officer at the scene he didn't get a look at the face. He said that from the witness stand, out loud, and I remember turning to look at the jury box because I thought, this is it, that is the whole case. They heard that. 2 of them were looking at Ray. One woman was writing something, and I understood, in that second, something that took me 12 more years to be able to say. They were not weighing it. They had a picture in their heads that had been put there by every TV program they had ever watched, and Marvin Teague had confirmed the picture, and what he said on cross did not remove the picture. Nothing removes the picture. That is what the picture is for. Curtis Ledford testified on day 4. The informant, he was thin and jittery, and he had been coached, and you could see where the coaching stopped and the improvising started. He said Ray told him in the holding area that he didn't mean for the girl to get hurt. That is the sentence that put my husband away. 9 words from a man who was trading them for a dropped possession charge. Our attorney did what he could. He got Ledford to admit the arrangement. He got him to admit he had done the same thing in a case in 2007. He got him to admit he could not remember what Ray was wearing, or what time it was. or how long they had talked. And then Ledford said, unprompted, I remember he was crying, and I watched two jurors sit forward. That is how it works. That is exactly how it works. You cannot unring it. A liar with one good detail beats a truthful man with none, every time, and the good detail does not even have to be true. It just has to be the kind of thing a person would only say if they had been there. Ray testified on day 5, against advice. I want to tell you about my husband on that stand, because it is the last time I saw him at full size. He was calm, he was polite, he said yes sir and no sir. He told them what time he clocked out, and what road he took, and where he stopped for gas and what he said to me when he got in bed. Which was nothing, because I was asleep. And Gerald Pace asked him one question that I have thought about every week for 16 years. He said, Mr. Whitfield, you're a large man, aren't you? And Ray said, yes, sir. And Pace said, no further questions, that was it. That was the cross. He asked my husband to confirm his own body, and then he sat down, and the jury took that back into the room with them. And 4 hours and 11 minutes later they came out. I have never been able to explain to anybody what it is to watch a lawyer use a man's own shoulders against him and have it work. Now I have to tell you about 12 years, and I'm going to do it faster than it happened, but I need you to feel the length of it. Micah was born on August 2nd, 209. Ray was in Central Prison. He heard his son's first cry over a collect call from a hallway phone, with a guard telling him to wrap it up. I held the phone against my chest, so he could hear the baby breathing, and they cut the call at 15 minutes. My son's entire childhood happened in a visitation room. I want you to sit with that. Every single memory Micah has of his father, before the age of 13, is in a room with a vending machine, under fluorescent light, with a guard against the wall, for 2 hours at a time, twice a month when I could afford the gas. Ray was a father through glass and through paper, and he was extraordinary at it. And I will fight anybody who says different. He wrote Micah a letter every single week for 12 years, mine is every week, without missing, over 600 letters, and they are in 3 boxes in my closet right now. He learned things so he could teach them. When Micah got into dinosaurs at 4, Ray got the prison library to find him dinosaur books and taught himself enough paleontology to argue with a preschooler about Spinosaurus. When Micah was struggling with fractions in 4th grade, Ray worked fraction problems in his cell and mailed him worked examples in pencil. He raised his son from inside a cage, and Micah is 17 now and going to UNC Charlotte in the fall, and that is not because of me. That is because a man in Central Prison wrote him a letter every week for 630-some weeks. What it cost me, I lost our house before it was ever ours. I lost most of my 20s. I worked at a call center, then a Bojangles, then I got the school job in 2015 and clung to it. Collect calls from Central Prison were, at the worst point, about $4 for 15 minutes. And there were months I chose between the phone and the light bill. And I want to be very clear that I chose the phone more than once and we sat in the dark. I lost most of my friends, which happens. And I lost the version of myself that assumed things generally worked out. What I did not lose, I never once thought he did it. Not for a single hour in 12 years. And I want to be honest that this was not pure loyalty, it was information. I knew what time he got home that night. I knew the man 19 years, and I never saw him raise his hand to anybody. The state of North Carolina had a theory, and I had a marriage, and I knew which one was real. I want to slow down on the 12 years, because I ran through them in a page, and that is a lie of proportion. 12 years is not a paragraph. 12 years is 4,500 days, and I was awake for all of them. The first year I was a woman on fire. I read every appellate decision I could find at the public library. I taught myself what a Brady violation was. I called that public defender's office so often that a paralegal named Renee started taking my calls personally. And Renee is the one who eventually told me kindly, in 2011, that direct appeal was not going to work, and that what I needed was new evidence, and that new evidence costs money. The second and third years I was angry at everyone. Ray's mother, because she cried instead of fighting. My own mother, because she asked me one time in 2011, whether I was completely sure. I did not speak to my mother for 2 years over that question, and I was wrong to cut it that long, and she died in 2019, and we had made it up by then, but not all the way. Years 4 through 8 are the ones I cannot really account for. That is the truth about a long sentence. The family does the time too, and there is a middle stretch where you stop doing anything but existing. I worked. I raised Micah. I drove to Raleigh twice a month. I did not date. I did not travel. I did not decorate. I lived in a holding pattern that lasted the length of a childhood. What I remember from that stretch is mostly the drive. 3 hours each way to Central Prison. I know that road the way you know a hallway in your own house. There is a Shell station in Benson where I stopped every single time for 11 years. Same station, same coffee. And when Ray came home, I drove past it on the way back from something and I had to pull over onto the shoulder and sit there for 20 minutes. And the visits, 2 hours, twice a month, in a room with round tables bolted to the floor. Here is what nobody tells you about prison visits. You have 2 hours and you have to decide in advance what you're going to spend them on. If you spend them on the case, you do not get your husband. If you spend them on your marriage, you do not move the case. I made that choice every 2 weeks for 12 years, and I got it wrong constantly, and you cannot bring anything in. No photographs. No drawings. Micah made him hundreds of drawings, and every one had to go through the mail, and half of them came back rejected for reasons nobody explained. You cannot bring food. You can buy from the vending machines. And I want to tell you that I spent, over 12 years, probably $4,000 in prison vending machines, because a bag of Cheez-Its from a machine is the only meal a man in there gets to have with his family, and Ray would eat them slowly and make them last the whole 2 hours. The contact rules change depending on the block he was on in the year and, honestly, the guard. A hug at the start and the end sometimes. Some years, nothing. There was a stretch of about 18 months where we were behind glass on a phone, and Micah was 4 and 5 during that period, and he could not understand why he was talking to his daddy on a telephone while looking right at him. And he would put his hand flat on the glass, and Ray would put his hand up on the other side, and my son thought that was normal. He thought that was what fathers were. The letters are what saved that marriage. 630-some letters to Micah, and about the same number to me, and they are the only reason I can say we had a real 19-year marriage and not a legal arrangement with visitation. He wrote like he talked. He wrote about nothing. What he ate, what somebody said in the yard, a bird on the fence, and every letter to me, without exception, ended the same way. Every single one, 12 years. You didn't sign up for this. You stayed anyway. I know what that costs. 600 times. He never let one go out without acknowledging the price. I have not been able to read them since he died. They are in the closet in 3 boxes with the ones to Micah. I open the closet and I look at the boxes and I close the closet. I will get there. I am 41. I have time. He didn't. The appeals went the way appeals go. Denied, denied, denied. In 2015, I wrote my first letter to the Innocence Project. In 2017, I wrote another one. In 2019, I got a call from a woman named Priya Raghavan, and my hands shook so hard I dropped the phone in the sink. What broke it was a jacket. Ashley Boone had grabbed her attacker. She fought him. She was 5'2", and she fought a man twice her size, and when she did, she got skin under her nails and she got a handful of his jacket sleeve, and there was blood on the cuff of her uniform that was not hers. In 2009, they typed it and said it was inconclusive. In 221, with the technology that exists now, they ran it again. It was not Ray. It was not Ray by an enormous margin. It was not even close. And when Priya called me at 4:40 in the afternoon on a Tuesday to tell me, I was standing in the school kitchen with a pan of chicken nuggets in my hands, and I set the pan down on the counter and walked out into the parking lot and knelt down on the asphalt. He walked out on May 6, 2022. I want to describe that day accurately because the news covered it and the news got it wrong the way they always do. There is footage of us on the courthouse steps and we look like a family in a movie. There were cameras and there was a woman from the DA's office reading a statement about the integrity of the process. Here's what the footage does not show. My husband, 48 hours out, standing in the doorway of a Cracker Barrel in Leland, unable to walk in because the room had too many people in it and no clear exits, and he did not know what to do with his hands. He was crying and apologizing to me for crying, and I said, "Let's go home," and we ate in the car in the parking lot. He was 48 years old inside of a 38-year-old body. He had lost most of his teeth on one side. He had hepatitis C from that place. He had a tremor. He could not sleep with the door closed, and he could not sleep with it open. And for the first 2 months he slept on the floor beside the bed because a mattress that soft made him feel like he was falling, and he was so happy. That is the part I cannot make anybody understand. He was so happy it was hard to look at. He cried the first time he stood in the produce section at Harris Teeter, in public, and a stalker asked if he was all right, and Ray said, "Ma'am, I'm just looking at the peaches." That is when I found out about the notebook. He had it in the box of property they hand you. A composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, and the front third was filled with his handwriting. And at the top of the first page it said, "When I get out," it was a list. It was 212 items long, written over 12 years, and every one of them was small. Number 1, eat a peach standing over the sink. Number 4, drive with the windows down and the radio too loud. Number 9, take a shower that lasts as long as I want it to. Number 23, sit in a chair I picked. Number 40, watch it rain from inside. Number 61, go to Micah's school and just walk in the front door like anybody. Number 88, cook a meal for Dana and make her sit down. Number 104, learn what a good tomato tastes like again. 212 of them. 12 years, one man, adding a line whenever he thought of something the free world had that he did not. He got through about 60 of them. He died on July 14, 2023, of a myocardial infarction in our kitchen at 6:20 in the morning, 14 months and 8 days after he walked out of that courthouse. He was 39. I want to be precise about what killed my husband, because the death certificate says heart attack and the death certificate is not lying, but it is also not telling the truth. He went in with no health problems at 25. 12 years of that food, that stress, that violence, no real medical care. He had chest pain in 2016 and put in 3 requests and was seen 10 weeks later by a nurse who told him it was heartburn. He came out with untreated hypertension and a heart that had been running uphill for over a decade. The state of North Carolina killed Ray Whitfield. It just took them 14 years and they did it slowly, and there is nobody to charge. I need to tell you about the 14 months properly because I gave you the peaches and the produce section, and that is the version people can stand to hear. Here's the rest of it. He could not be behind me. That was the first thing I learned. If I was at the stove and he came into the kitchen, he would take the long way around so that he was in my sight line, and he did it without thinking about it. Every time for 14 months. I never asked. I did not need to. He could not sit with his back to a door. We ate at restaurants exactly 4 times, and every time he took the seat facing the entrance and I took the other one. And by the 3rd time, it was just where we sat. Noise was the worst. Not loud noise, sudden noise, a dropped pan. Micah slamming a car door. Ray would go completely still, not startled still, and his hands would come up about 6 inches, and then he would put them back down and say something ordinary. He did that maybe 200 times in 14 months. He did not know how to want things. This is the one that broke me. I took him to Walmart the first week and told him to pick out whatever he wanted, and he stood in the middle of an aisle for 4 or 5 minutes and then picked up a package of white t-shirts. And I said, "Ray, anything. Anything in this store." And he said, I don't know how to do this, Dana." 12 years of a state issuing you everything you touch. He had lost the muscle. He had nightmares that he did not describe. He apologized for them. And the paperwork. God, the paperwork. Nobody tells you this part. A man walks out of prison exonerated after 12 years, and the state of North Carolina does not hand him anything. He had no driver's license. He had no credit history, minus 12 years of nothing, which is worse than bad credit. He had no work history since 2009. He could not get a bank account for 6 weeks. There is no reentry support for the wrongfully convicted. Because reentry programs are for parolees and he was not a parolee, he was an innocent man, and innocent men fall through a hole in the system that has no bottom. He applied for 11 jobs. 11. And the thing is, everybody knew who he was. It had been in the paper, he was locally famous for about 3 weeks, and so nobody wanted to be the one who told him no, so they just did not call back. He got hired, finally, at a landscaping company in Leland, run by a man named Tony Bartelli, who had seen the news and called us. Ray worked there for 7 months and loved it. He came home dirty and tired and happy. That is the closest we got to the life. And I want to say the true thing about those 14 months, which is complicated, and which I have never said out loud. They were hard. They were not a reunion. I had been alone for 12 years, and I had gotten very good at running a household by myself, and he came home into a life that had closed over the space where he used to be, and we had to open it back up, and it hurt. There were fights. There was one bad night in October where he said something about how I had rearranged an entire life, and he went and sat in the truck for an hour. We were figuring it out. That is the honest state of things when he died. We were 14 months into figuring it out, and we were maybe 60% of the way there, and I thought we had 30 years. The last morning was ordinary. That is the part I hold on to, and the part that guts me. July 14th, 2023, a Friday. And he was up before me making coffee, which he did every single morning because he could. Because it was on the list. Number 31, make the coffee for once. I came into the kitchen and he was on the floor. I did CPR for 11 minutes until the ambulance came. I know it was 11 minutes because the report says so. I do not remember any of it. I remember the linoleum, and I remember that the coffee maker was still going and that it finished and made that noise it makes while I was doing compressions on my husband. He was gone before they got there. They worked on him anyway, in my kitchen, for 20 minutes because that is what they do for the family. 14 months and 8 days. The compensation, since people always ask. North Carolina pays $50,000 per year of wrongful imprisonment, capped at $750,000. Ray filed in June of 2022. The claim was still pending when he died. It has still not been paid. I'm told it is moving. The funeral was July 22nd at Mount Olive Missionary Baptist on Castle Street. It was full. I want to say that because I had braced for something small. 12 years is a long time and people move on, and that church was standing room. The Innocence Project sent 3 people. Micah spoke, 17 years old, and read one line from one of the 600 letters, and I will not tell you which one because it belongs to him. And at the reception, in the fellowship hall in the basement, when the crowd had thinned to maybe 20 people, a woman I had never seen took my hand in both of hers and told me she had been there. We went out to the parking lot. I did that because Micah was in the room and because I did not yet know what she was going to say, and I have some instinct in me that protects that boy first. Her name was Colleen Rourke. She was 33. She had driven 6 hours from somewhere in Tennessee that morning, and she was driving back that night. And here's what she told me, standing between a church van and my Corolla in 94-degree heat. In March of 2009, she was 19 years old. She was living in Leland with a man named Dale Pruitt, who was 26, and who she had been with for about a year and a half, and who had put her in the emergency room twice, once for a wrist and once for what she described to me as my face. On the night of March 19th, she was in the passenger seat of Dale Pruitt's dark green Grand Am, parked at the edge of the lot of the Gas Inn Go on Carolina Beach Road, because he had told her to wait in the car. She watched him walk in. She watched through the window. She saw him go behind the counter. She heard the shot from inside a closed car, and she says it did not sound like a gun. It sounded like somebody dropping a board. She saw him come out with the money in his hand and blood on his sleeve and get in the car and say, "Don't." That was the entire thing he said to her that night. Don't. She was 19 years old and she was pregnant and she did not know it yet. For 3 weeks she did nothing, and then on April 9th, 2009, minus after the arrest was in the paper. After she saw Ray's face on the news and understood that they had the wrong man, Colleen Rourke walked into the New Hanover County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak to a detective. She got a detective named Ron Hollis. He was the lead on the Boone case. He had already made the arrest. He had already given a press conference, she told him. All of it, everything I just told you, in an interview room, at 19 years old, 6 weeks pregnant, with her boyfriend not knowing where she was. And Detective Hollis leaned back in his chair and asked her whether she understood what she was admitting to. He explained to her that by her own account she had driven with Pruitt to the location, waited in the vehicle during the commission of the offense, and left with him afterward. He used the words getaway driver. He used the words accessory. He asked her if she knew what felony murder was in North Carolina, and he explained it to her that if you participate in a robbery and someone dies, you are on the hook for the killing. He told her she was looking at serious time, and then he asked her, and she says he asked it kindly, whether there was anybody who could take the baby. She was 19. She had a ninth-grade education and a man at home who had already broken her wrist. She sat in that room for a little under 2 hours, and when she came out she had not signed anything, and there was no recording of any of it, because it was 2009 and it was an interview and not an interrogation. On paper. She drove home. She did not tell Dale. 3 weeks later she left him, got on a bus to Knoxville with a garbage bag of clothes. And she never came back to North Carolina until the morning of my husband's funeral. I stood in that parking lot and I listened to all of it, and I want to tell you honestly what was in me, because I do not want to be a saint in this story. What was in me was murder. 12 years, 600 letters, my son's whole childhood in a room with a vending machine, a man on the floor beside our bed because the mattress was too soft. 60 peaches out of 212, she could have ended it in 3 weeks. She had it all, the name, the car, the sleeve. She walked into a building with the entire truth in her mouth, and then she got on a bus. I said to her, and I remember it, word for word, you had it, you had all of it, and you got on a bus. And she said, yes, ma'am. She did not defend herself. That is the thing that has stayed with me. She had 6 hours in a car to build a defense, and she did not use one line of it. She stood in the heat and said, yes, ma'am. Then she said, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know what I did. I've known every day. I'm telling you because he died, and I read it in the paper, and I have a daughter who's 16 and I couldn't be a person who never said it out loud. And she said one more thing, and this is the sentence that started to turn something in me even while I was still shaking with hate. He got 12 years, I got 17, his ended. I want to go back to that parking lot, because I moved through it fast and there were things she said that I did not hear properly until much later. She told me about the 17 years. I did not ask. She offered it in about 6 sentences and then stopped. Like she had caught herself asking for sympathy and did not think she was allowed. She stayed with Dale Pruitt 3 more weeks after the interview room. 3 weeks in a house with the man she had just tried to turn in, knowing that a detective had her name in a file. She said she did not sleep for most of it. She said she used to lie awake doing the math on whether Hollis would call the house. She left on a Tuesday when Pruitt was at work. Garbage bag, bus Knoxville, because she had a cousin there, and the cousin let her sleep on a couch for 5 months. Her daughter was born in December of 2009. Pruitt has never met her. Helene told her, when the girl was old enough, that her father was in prison in Georgia, which was true. For a different thing? And then she said the sentence that I could not get out of my head for months afterward. I got a job at a Kroger in 2010, and every time somebody came in with a badge on, I'd go in the back. For 13 years, any uniform, she would find a reason to be in the stockroom. She said she has never had a passport, never been fingerprinted for anything, turned down a job in 2016 that required a background check, even though it paid $4 more an hour, and never told her husband, the kind man I met for 4 minutes, the actual reason. He knows now. He found out the same week I did because she told him before she drove to the funeral. And she said, I thought about calling somebody about 1,000 times. Every year I thought maybe now. And every year I'd think, if I call now, then all the years I didn't call become a thing I chose. As long as I didn't call, it was still just something that happened to me. I want to point at that sentence because I think it is the most honest thing in this entire story, and it explains almost everything about human beings. As long as she did not speak, she could tell herself she was still 19 in an interview room. Still a girl something was being done to. The second she spoke, she became a 33-year-old woman who had let a man rot for 12 years. Speaking was not just dangerous. Speaking would have made the silence hers. That is the trap. That is the actual trap. And Ray understood it in 2017 from a cell with a ninth grade education. And it took me until I was 41 and sitting on somebody's porch in Tennessee. She said one more thing in that parking lot that I did not process until weeks later. She said, I read about him getting out in 2022. I saw it on the news and I said, and you didn't come then. And she said, no ma'am. And I said, why not? And Colleen Rourke said, because he was out, and he was free, and he had you all. And I thought, if I go now, I take that. He'd have to sit in a courtroom again and look at me and it all start over. I thought the kindest thing I could do was let him have his life. She sat in Tennessee in 2022 and decided that the merciful thing was to stay out of my husband's way. He sat in Raleigh in 2017 and decided the merciful thing was to stay out of hers. Two people, 13 years apart, both choosing to spare the other, both wrong about what the other one wanted, and Ashley Boone's killer painted houses in Georgia the entire time. If either of them had been a little more selfish, that man would have been arrested a decade earlier. I do not know what to do with that. I have been sitting with it for 2 years. Every day I think I have got hold of it, and then it turns over again. I told her to leave. I want to be honest about that too. I did not comfort that woman. I said, you need to go now. And she said, yes ma'am, again. And she went to her car and drove 6 hours back to Tennessee. I went back inside and finished my husband's repast and did not tell my son anything. And that night I sat in the kitchen where Ray died, and I hated her with a purity I have never felt about anything. For 3 days. On the 3rd day I started going through his things, because that is what you do, and because I could not sleep and there was nothing else to do at 4 in the morning. And I went back through the notebook. I had read the list. I had not read the back. There were about 15 pages at the back of that composition notebook, upside down and starting from the last page. The way he used to do so, he could keep the two things separate. It was not a list, it was writing, dated entries, some a page long, some 3 lines, and on a page dated 11/22/17 - 5 years before he came home, 6 years before he died. My husband wrote this. I have it in front of me. I'm gonna read it exactly. New guy on the block from Brunswick County. Talking about a dude named Dale Pruitt, saying Pruitt used to brag on a store he took off Carolina Beach RD in '09, and how somebody else went down for it. Says Pruitt is doing 15 in Georgia on something else. Says Pruitt had a girlfriend then, young, says he beat her bad. Been sitting with this 2 weeks. If Pruitt did it, then there was a girl in that car. And if there was a girl in that car she knew and she never came. Been mad about that for 2 weeks. The next entry is dated 8 days later. Still on it, told my lawyer to look at Pruitt. Told her don't look for the girl. She asked me why. Here's why. She was 19. I've been locked up with 40 men like Dale Pruitt. I know what they are. Whatever he did to her to keep her quiet, she's still in it. She got no cell, but she got no door either. If she'd come forward, I'd be home. That's true, and I ain't going to pretend it ain't. Some days I can't hardly breathe over it, but I done the math. I get out at some point. Somebody comes and says, here's the name, here's the DNA, and a door opens. Ain't nobody coming to open hers. She got to do that herself, and she don't have the tools. 12 years in here is bad. 12 years being the person who let a man take it for you and being too scared to say, I don't know what that is, but I don't believe it's less. I ain't going to be the last thing that happened to that girl. Enough men already been that. Told my lawyer, get Pruitt. Leave her be. I sat on the floor of my bedroom at 4:30 in the morning and read that maybe 9 times. He knew. For 5 years, my husband sat in a cell knowing there was a witness who could have freed him, and he made a decision, alone, with nothing, with everything to gain to protect her. Not out of weakness, he wrote, some days I can't hardly breathe over it. He was furious. He did it anyway, on the arithmetic that her prison had no door, and his did. And then there was one more thing, and it is the reason I am telling this story. I went back to the front of the notebook, to the list. 212 items, written over 12 years, and I had read them in order the day he came home, and I had cried over the peaches like everybody does. Item 212 was the last thing he ever added to it. The handwriting is different, shakier, thicker pen, and it is dated in the margin, 4/2022. Written in the weeks right before he walked out. 212 items. 12 years of a man dreaming about tomatoes and rain and driving with the windows down. And the last one, the 212th, is this: find out her name and tell her I ain't mad. He got through about 60 of them, he never got to 212. I called Priya Raghavan that morning at 6 a.m., and she picked up on the second ring. And I asked her whether it was true that Ray had told her to leave the witness alone, and there was a long silence on that phone, and then she said, "He made me promise. I fought him on it for a year. There is a part of this I have avoided, and I'm going to do it now, because leaving it out would make me a liar." The 3 days. I have told you I hated her for 3 days. What I have not told you is what I actually did in those 3 days, because I want anybody listening who is in the middle of something like this to know that the ugly part is normal, and it does not disqualify you from getting somewhere better. The first night I looked her up, I found a Facebook profile. I found a woman with a daughter and a husband and photographs of a cookout. And I sat at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning and scrolled through 17 years of a life that existed because my husband's did not. There is a photo of her at a high school graduation, her daughter's, last spring, cap and gown, and I looked at that photograph and I thought, Micah's father was in a cell for his kindergarten graduation, his 5th grade promotion, his middle school ceremony, and you were standing in the sun in a nice dress. I wrote her a message. I did not send it. It was 4 paragraphs and it was the worst thing I have ever written, and I'm glad it does not exist. The second day, I thought about calling a reporter. Seriously thought about it. I had a contact from the exoneration coverage, a woman at the Star News who had been decent to us, and I sat with my phone in my hand and imagined the story. Woman withheld evidence for 12 years. Her name in print, her town, her employer, her daughter reading it. I want to be honest that what stopped me was not mercy. What stopped me was that I did not know whether it would help convict Pruitt or wreck the case, and I did not want to do anything that might let him walk. That is the truth. On day 2, I was not a good person restraining herself. I was an angry person doing tactics. And the 3rd day I could not sleep, and I went to the closet at 4 in the morning to get the notebook. And I was not looking for wisdom. I want to be clear about that. I was going to the notebook because I wanted to read the list again and get angrier. I wanted to look at 212 peaches and tomatoes and rainstorms and hold them up against a woman at a cookout in Tennessee. I was going to that notebook to load the gun. And that is when I turned it over and found the back pages. I did not go looking for my husband's mercy. It ambushed me. I was 3 days into building a case for hating her, and the only man withstanding had already ruled against me, 5 years earlier, in pencil, in a cell, and filed it where I would eventually find it. I have thought a lot about what would have happened if that notebook had been lost. If it had been in the property they never returned, or if I had thrown out the composition books along with the rest, the way you throw things out, I would be a different woman right now. I would be a woman who was owed something and never got it, who had a name and an address and a grievance with no bottom. That is a whole life. People live that life for 40 years. I have met them at the exoneration conferences, the families who never got an answer, or got one and could not put it down. The notebook is the only reason I'm not one of them. And the reason the notebook exists is that a man with nothing spent some of his nothing writing down why he was going to be merciful. On a date in November of 2017, when he had absolutely no way of knowing that anybody would ever read it. He was not writing it for me. That is what I keep coming back to. He was not leaving instructions, he had no idea he would die. He was writing it for himself, alone, at night, to keep himself straight the way a man does when there's nobody in the world to hold him to anything, and he decides to be held anyway. That is the part that I cannot get past, not the mercy, the privacy of the mercy. I want to tell you what I did, and then I'm going to tell you what I think it means, and then I'm going to let you go. It took me 11 days to find Colleen Rourke. She had not given me a number. I had a name in Tennessee. It turned out to be easier than I expected. which tells you something about how easy it would have been for a real investigator in 2009. I drove 6 hours. I did not call first because I did not trust myself to say it on a phone. She lives outside Maryville. It is a small place, and she works at a distribution center, and she has a daughter who is 16 and a husband who I met for about 4 minutes and who is, from what I could see, a kind man. She opened the door and she saw me and her whole face went white, and she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. Like she had been waiting 17 years for somebody to finally come, and here it was, and she was ready to take it. We sat on her porch steps. I did not go inside. I said I need to read you something, and I read her the November 2017 entry. All of it. Out loud, on the steps, in the heat, in front of a woman who was shaking so hard she had to put her hands under her legs to hold them still. And then I read her item 212. And Colleen Rourke put her face in her hands and made a sound that I recognized because I made it in a courtroom in 2010, and I sat there and I let her. When she could talk, she said he knew. He knew, and she couldn't finish it. And I said the thing I had driven 6 hours to say, which I had practiced in the car and which came out completely differently than I practiced. He was going to come find you. It was on the list. It was the last thing on the list, and he didn't get to it. And I'm not going to let the state of North Carolina take that from him too. So I'm doing it. He wasn't mad. That's it, that's what I came to say. I want to be extremely clear about something because I know how this sounds and I know what people will say in the comments. I did not forgive her. I am not sure I have even now, 2 years later. That is not what that porch was. What I did was deliver a message. My husband spent 12 years in a cage and used some of it to decide to be merciful to the person who put him there, and he wrote it down, and then he died before he could say it. I was the only person alive who could carry it, and there is a version of me that could have burned that notebook and let that woman live out her life inside what she did. And that version of me is not somebody Ray would have recognized. He made his decision in 2017 with nothing. I made mine in 2023 with a house and a son and 40 years of being loved by him. Mine was easier. If he could do his, I could do mine. I want to tell you about the day of the verdict in Pruitt's trial, February of last year, because something happened in that courtroom that finished this for me. Colleen testified on the second and third day. I was there for all of it. Micah wanted to come and I told him no, and he came anyway, 18 by then and out of my jurisdiction, and sat beside me. She was on the stand for a little over 5 hours across 2 days. Pruitt's attorney went after her exactly the way you would expect. Why did you wait? Why should anybody believe you now? Isn't it true you have been telling a story that gets more convenient every year? There was a stretch on the second afternoon where she was crying so hard the judge called a recess. And through all of it, Dale Pruitt sat at the defense table and looked at her. Not glaring. Worse than glaring, he looked at her steadily. The whole time, with a small pleasant expression. The way you look at somebody you own. 17 years and a prison sentence and a courtroom full of people, and he was still from 20 feet away, doing the thing he had done to a 19-year-old in a green Grand Am. And I watched Colleen Rourke look back at him. She did it during the last hour. She had been looking at the prosecutor, at her hands, at the floor. And then she stopped in the middle of an answer, and she turned her head, and she looked directly at him for what must have been 5 or 6 seconds, and she finished her sentence looking right at him, and then she turned back. I have never seen anything like it in my life. Not in 12 years of courtrooms. He looked away first, and I understood something in that second that I had not understood in 17 years, which is that she had not been silent because she was weak. She had been silent because a professional had taken a 19-year-old and taught her what happens to women who talk, and it had taken her 17 years and my husband's funeral and a notebook to build the thing she needed to look back at him. The jury was out for 2 days on Pruitt. 2 days for a case with DNA and an eyewitness. 4 hours and 11 minutes for my husband. Vicky Boone and I sat in that hallway during the deliberation, the mother of the girl and the wife of the man they blamed, and we did not say much. At one point she said, 17 years I've been mad at the wrong man, and I said, ma'am, so was everybody. And she laughed, one of those terrible funeral laughs, and said, I sent your husband a letter in 2011. It was awful. I want you to know I sent it. And I said, "He kept it." Because he did. It is in the boxes. He never told me, and I found it after. And I'm not going to tell you what it said because it was written by a mother 2 years after her daughter was murdered, and she is not the villain of anything. When they read the verdict, Vicky Boone made a sound and grabbed my hand, and my son put his arm around my shoulders, and Colleen Rourke was 3 rows back, alone, with nobody to grab. Afterward in the parking lot, I did something I did not plan. I walked over to her and I hugged her. I do not know what that was. I have thought about it for a year. It was not forgiveness, I have already told you that. I think it was closer to recognition, one woman who had lost 17 years to Dale Pruitt. Hugging another one. She said into my shoulder, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," about 6 times. And I said, "He already knew, remember? He already knew and he wasn't mad." That is the last time I saw her in person. Here is where things are. Dale Pruitt was charged with the murder of Ashley Boone in February of 2024. Colleen Rourke testified. She testified for 2 days, and she did it with no immunity deal in place at first, which her own attorney told her was insane. He was convicted last spring. He is serving life at a facility in North Carolina now, 17 years after he did it. Ashley Boone's mother Vicky was in that courtroom. I sat 2 rows behind her. Afterward in the hallway, she took my hand. Everybody in this story keeps taking my hands. And she said, "They took your husband and they took my daughter and they took 17 years off both of us." Vicky and I talk about once a month now. She has a whole grief I do not get to touch, because her girl is still dead and mine got 12 months of freedom, and we do not compare. But she is the only person on this earth who knows what that specific room feels like. Detective Ron Hollis retired in 2016 with a full pension. He was never charged with anything. There is no crime in North Carolina that fits what he did in that room to a 19-year-old girl. There's an internal file. It is sealed. Micah is at UNC Charlotte. He is studying criminal justice, and he told me last Thanksgiving that he wants to be a defense investigator. The exact job that did not exist for his father because there was no money for one. He has read the notebook. He read the November 2017 entry alone in his room and came downstairs about 40 minutes later and said, "That's who he was, though. That's exactly who he was." The compensation claim was finally paid in 2024 to Ray's estate, $750,000 for 12 years and 4 months and one man's whole life. I put most of it in a fund at the Innocence Project of North Carolina, named for him, that pays for investigators. Not lawyers? Investigators. The thing he did not have. And Colleen. People always want to know about Colleen. We are not friends. I want to be honest. There is no version of this where we are friends, but she calls me on July 14th. Every year. She has called twice now. She does not talk long. She says, "I'm thinking about Ray today," and I say thank you, and we hang up. That is what we have, and it is the correct amount. Here's the last thing, and then I'm done. The thing I have not been able to get past 2 years on is not the injustice. I have made a kind of peace with the injustice, in the way you make peace with weather. It is the arithmetic in that notebook. My husband had one asset in the world in 2017. He had nothing, no money, no freedom, no phone, no future, no reasonable hope. He had exactly one thing, which was a name, and that name was the only key to the only door he had. And he was told it, and he was mad about it for 2 weeks, and then he did the math on somebody else's prison and decided hers was worse. He gave away the key from inside the cell. To the person who locked him in, "I do not have a lesson for you. I have that. But I will say this, because it is the only useful thing I have learned in 17 years of this. Every single person in this story was made small by fear. Colleen at 19 in an interview room, that detective so afraid of being wrong in public that he threatened a teenager into silence, a public defender with 140 files, 12 jurors in 4 hours and 11 minutes who were, I'm certain, afraid of what would happen if they let a big man go. And one man in the worst place any of them had ever imagined, with the most reason to be afraid who was not. That is the whole thing. That is all I have got. The freest person in this entire story spent it in a cell in Raleigh, and he spent it on the woman who put him there, and he never got to eat number 104, and he never found out what a good tomato tastes like again. If somebody's silence cost you everything, I'm not going to stand here and tell you to forgive them. Nobody gets to tell you that, including me, and I have not entirely done it myself. What I will tell you is this: go find out what their prison was. Not to excuse it. Just find out. Because I spent 3 days certain I knew exactly who Colleen Work was, and I was wrong in a way I would have carried to my own grave, and the man with the most right to hate her had already looked and already known and already decided. He was in a cell, and he could see further than I could see from my own kitchen. Drop one word in the comments about how this story made you feel. Just one word. Tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment. And if you know somebody sitting on something they have been too afraid to say for years, share this with them, because there's a version of this where Colleen speaks in 2009, and in that version, my husband is 52 years old and standing in his kitchen right now. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.